Welcome, Paul. It's so great to see you.
Good morning, Paula. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. So excited to chat with you about your mindfulness experience. And I know a bit about your story, but I'm looking forward to hearing more and also hearing about what you're up to these days. So, yeah.
Okay. So where to start, I guess.
So, why don't we start at the beginning? So, what
I,
was your first experience of mindfulness? When did you come across, whether maybe not the word, but this concept of being present and that being a powerful thing? Can you tell us a bit about that?
yeah, it's ironically the first time I started practicing mindfulness, I wasn't even mindfully aware that's what I was doing. So I was 10 years old as a cross-country skier, learning to, navigate the world of this endurance sport. And we would be training myself, my teammates, my coach for a big event every year out in Quebec, 2 day ski event. And the coach was into sports psychologists and psychology, and he had us doing a lot of breath work, focusing work. Um, but really, what it was understanding the body scan. So we we're learning to do breathing and body scan, all under the mask of performing well in the realm of sport. So, fast forward, um, you know, 10, 15 years from that point, I was starting to explore yoga as a triathlete at that stage of my athletic career. I was doing a lot of swimming, biking, and running. And I was looking kind of, again, for that performance edge of flexibility, um, and started to practice hot yoga. And it
Hmm.
was in one of the first couple of hot yoga classes. I always say the almost like the anvil or the hammer dropped. And it was just a whole different way of connecting with my body. I was doing something very physical. It was very challenging. Hot yoga studios are probably close to 50 degrees centigrade. Um, and it just pulled me into a different level of mindfulness. So when I started to walk away from the yoga studio and get back into my day to day, I kept thinking to myself, like, what can I apply from the yoga mat into my day to day life? And things just escalated from there. So I started to learn about being more present when I was swimming, feeling the water
Hmm.
more, feeling the water over my body, um, just little things like that, and breath work. So it was really being more conscious of my breathing when I was running. Am I breathing through my mouth? Am I breathing through my nose? Am I taking
Hmm.
shallow breaths? So over the journey of my athletic career, I was just always in these moments of being able to practice mindfulness. But it was always a physical aspect of mindfulness. Never, I'm just not wired to sit down and breathe for 10 minutes. It's just not me, right? Um, but it started to expand, just being able to be present when there's complete chaos around you. You're able to take a step back
Hmm.
in your mind and just be fully present and focus on what's in front of you. So I've been able to integrate that all throughout my athletic career. But then I started to integrate it into my professional world in leadership and organizational development. And I've had different portfolios under that overall encompassing a career path. But I also started to integrate more wellness into my leadership development programs and teaching leaders mindfulness in the way that I learned it, not
Hmm.
necessarily through a wellness lens, but from a leadership lens. Like, how do you be more present, more focused as a leader when there's constant distractions, everything happens? So I was kind of taking the knowledge from I always say from the yoga mat, repackaging it into, what organizations and businesses really needed from their leaders.
Hmm.
And again, it's a journey that never ends. It's constantly evolving. So, present day, I still practice yoga. I'm still a fairly competitive athlete in the world of endurance sport. I do a lot of ultra distance running where you have to be mindful. There's no way
Yes.
around it. When you get on the trails, I was racing a couple of years ago in the Yukon territory, and 80-kilometer trail race through the boreal forest. You have to be mindful of everything around you, whether it's grizzly bears or side of a mountain. Like it really pulls you into the here and now. So it's always there, and it's almost like a switch now that I can consciously turn on and turn off
Hmm.
sometimes, right?
Yeah, I love that. It sounds like almost unexpectedly you came across it when you were young.
Yeah,
That whoa, it's almost like there's this whole other dimension, like turning a light on. And what's interesting is that you didn't have to sit down for long periods of time to do this. It just
no, yeah,
through just being present in your activities and connecting to your breath was really important, it sounds like.
yeah. I like to call myself kind of day-to-day practitioner,
Okay.
right? So I haven't gone
Mhm.
through the formal yoga training or anything like that. I don't think I've taken a workshop around mindfulness. It's always been something physical. Like I said, it
Yes.
was on the yoga mat where everything really started to come together. And I kind of took it for granted going back to my earlier like preteens and teenage years as an athlete about what I was learning till about 10 years ago. I was talking to another sports psychologist and he kind of stopped me midway conversation. He said, Paul, you take things for granted. And I said, like, what do you mean, Peter? He said, like, you learned all these wellness and mindfulness skills at a really young age
Mm.
that are now, they're not nice to have, they're needed skills, whether
Yes.
it's at work, whether it's on your commute to and from work, or whether it's in relationships too. Like it's, especially as we're coming out of COVID, people are still kind of, you know, feeling things out and just, this whole new world is unfolding at a rapid pace. So having that skill to be mindful, just
Yeah.
even listening to the breath
Mhm.
sometimes, just not adjusting it, but just, it's a little shallow today. Interesting. Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it sounds like there's this connection to the body that was really, really important. And that's been my experience too, right? Because the mind can be in so many different places. And then
Yeah.
that's when we get overwhelmed, right? What's been your experience in terms of calming the mind, or when you get overwhelmed, how did you use that? Whether it was like, I would assume in a race there's like a lot of anxiety around, am I going to win, am I not, who else is here? And then maybe also if you translate it into the leaders that you work with in the day to day, like there's just so many deliverables and so many
Yeah.
people who need your attention.
Yeah.
So what's the connection between those two, like the mind and then
I, I,
the mindfulness in the body?
I think for me, a big part of that comes from my time learning and practicing sports psychology, because in that world, it takes in the mindfulness, the wellness, obviously, but also it packages it in a way that turns into performance. So
Okay.
every time you're at a start line, you do have the butterflies, but you're aware of it and you're
Mm-hmm.
mindful of it, and you can channel that energy into being
Uh-huh.
productive, right? And it happens all the time. We're human, right? Um, I remember, after years of being a competitive endurance athlete, I entered into this big Centurion bike race. There must have been 3,000 cyclists at the start line. And I was nervous. And I could just tell by just standing there in the big corral of all these cyclists, like we're elbow to elbow. And it's potentially dangerous. It's exciting. There's all sorts of emotion. But I could see I was holding on to my handlebars, not moving, and they were shaking back and forth, just like this. I could see the wheel kind of doing this. So I literally just a few deep breaths, refocused. The energy's still there, but I started to redirect it. And I'm able to catch that before it really goes too
Mm-hmm.
much out of control. So it's
Yeah.
interesting. So, in the workplace, working with leaders, even just, being mindful is one thing, but understanding, our thoughts and the stories we tell ourselves are not reality, right? And a lot of those stories and thoughts, when we run with them, start to appear in stress, start to come up in our physicalness, right? Our motion is really driven a lot by our thinking, or in a lot of cases, overthinking on things we really could just put aside in our mind.
Mm.
So it's being able to capture those moments. I remember working with a leader a few years back, getting them ready to do big presentations. And it was just like a 30-second, almost a self-check. So I rarely call it a mindfulness. It's just a self-check. See where your mind is at, see where your breathing is at, because you want to be kind of calm in those performance states. And then
Hmm.
you go in, whether it's a big meeting or a presentation, or whatever it is, you've kind of already done that pre-prep work.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So when you're going into a charged environment or event, it could be a race or it could be a big presentation, to just take that moment to check in, and almost, if you have nervousness or scattered thoughts, to kind of rechannel them
Yeah,
into how
yeah,
you can use them in the moment. That's very empowering. So it's not like you have to get rid of the thoughts, because you can't. It's just there,
they're there.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the weight and intention that you give those thoughts, right? So
Right.
very often we want to catch ourselves before we go down a spiral.
Hmm.
So, a lot of times, when we see conflict in the workplace, it's usually two people or even two teams have gone down spirals, thinking,
Hmm.
I'm right, they're wrong. Why don't they do this? Why don't they do that? And it's all really, that thinking that's gone astray.
Yeah. And how would somebody deal with that? Say you have a leader who says, well, this other team, they're not following the direction and it's causing me a lot of stress. And how would you help them through that? Like if they think it's the other team's fault,
Yeah,
it's
so
another
it's
person.
interesting. I'd say conflict resolution is not kind of my niche, but I
Right.
often encourage leaders just to be with themselves and understand their
Mm.
own thinking of, okay, why are you thinking this? With fact versus reality, and this almost walking them, coaching them through taking a step back. And
Yes.
it's that saying, just I just need to gain perspective, right?
Hmm.
So it's surrendering the voices, which are usually driven by the ego, and being able to put that aside. So I'm fortunate, I'm finding more and more leaders in organizations that are starting to practice mindfulness on their own, and encouraging them to bring it into the workspace. So there's a
Yeah.
saying in leadership development: leaders bring the weather.
Yes,
So,
really.
if we can get, senior leaders on board, understanding mindfulness, wellness in the workspace, what it means to organizational performance at all different levels, whether it's revenue, whether it's employee retention, employee engagement, there's so many metrics that it impacts in a positive way, that if we can start to create the culture to allow this to flourish, it will start to permeate.
Yeah, it's a really exciting time, isn't it? Because I
Yeah.
feel like even before the pandemic, it wasn't so accepted to do mindfulness or to take time to check in with yourself or something. Like, who has time for that?
Yeah.
But maybe it was in part. I'm curious to hear your experience, that the pandemic, it almost went too far. I think people were, my experience seeing what was going on is that people were in kind of like a fight or flight, like, let's do more, because let's just like keep doing and keep working so that we can kind of get through this. And then it just kind of all fell apart. Like, it was just too much. And people were saying, whoa, maybe
Yeah,
we need to pause. But
yeah,
I don't know if that's what you experienced.
I saw it at multiple levels. Like, I think for some people, again, personality types are very different. That
Hmm.
frantic working that you're mentioning was a way for them to deal with that anxiety or that uncertainty, right? So typically when something's out of our control, we immediately want to do things that gives us a sense of control an autonomy, right, over the situation. So it was a very unknown virus 3 years ago, right? We
Mm-hmm.
were, oh yeah, we're going to be locked down for 2 or 3 weeks maximum. 2 years later, right, we finally start to come around back to normality. But the people, yeah, were getting burnt out. Leaders, I definitely saw a lot of leaders getting burnt out. But then the positive was, I think it sped up the need for wellness and people's wellness practice in the space. So, you'd have a group of people that were doing the frantic work for about 6 months and then realized that's it, can't do it anymore. Shifted more to a blended approach between work and personal life. But it also instilled and taught people a lot of skills that we see carried over now into this new hybrid workspace, for example,
Mm-hmm.
like that fell out of that. The first year during COVID, there was an executive leader that I worked with. He literally said, Wednesday mornings, no meetings. It's all about personal time. And he made that
Mm-hmm.
right across the board. And again, top down, right? Leaders bring the weather. He put an emphasis on Wednesday morning is all about wellness. So it could be something physical, it could be something, professional development related, but something that would just get people shifting their mind away from work and away from this unknown virus.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting. It is such an exciting time post pandemic because it's almost like we were doing things one way. We were in a box, and
Yeah.
then the box kind of like exploded. And now what do we do? And it's interesting to see people using their schedules in strategic ways because it could also be for creative time, right? Like if you're just putting out fires and responding to emails all the time, where's your time to kind of plan, strategize, collaborate, think of new ideas, solve problems? So do you see people carving out some time for that, working in different ways, or is there also a divide between people that want to do new things versus like an old guard that's trying to put us back in the box?
I think there's a mixture out there, right? I think the good old days are gone. Not that good old days were ever good, right? Every time I hear that, it's like you're time traveling, right? Mindfulness teaches us not to time travel. Like don't travel too
Mm-hmm.
far in the future, and don't travel in the back, right? Be present. And we're in the midst of a big transition, just not in the way we do work, but also just culturally how we're going to be living, working, building relationships too, right? There's
Mm.
organizations are still trying to figure out what this new work world is going to look like. There's no clear cut answer at this time, but you definitely see the trend to more of that hybrid, blended work life approach. And a lot of people realized they were spending way too much time commuting, or they were
Yeah.
spending way too much time, in an office space that they were possibly getting distracted from doing great work. So there's all different stories and scenarios depending on the individuals, the organizations, but we definitely see more of a swing to this
Yeah.
this hybrid digital work world.
Yeah. Yeah. So interesting.
Yeah, it
And do
is.
you
It's
see
a great
any
time to be
trends
in
in
it.
terms of the challenges the leaders are facing right now?
I think it goes back to looking at what this new work world looks like.
Hmm.
And every leader, every leadership team, board of directors, there's a lot still to be discovered. Some organizations and businesses can work 100% remote,
Yeah.
no question about it. You shift gears, especially when we start to look at manufacturing stuff like that. That's just not possible. So it's not a one size fits all
Yes.
workspace anymore. And I think when leaders understand that, they're going to be able to take the pieces from each of the kind of the workspaces and craft their own unique business model that operates well for them.
Yeah, that's really interesting that there's not a one size fits all, because it's almost like we're growing up, right? I got this image of like when we're all kids and we were told like go to school at this time, and now it's like we're growing up. We need to figure out like what are my needs as an employee and how do I communicate those? How do I work best? What are my needs as an organization? Like if I'm a leader, a particular team or group or division, to check in, right? We need, it's like almost like mindfulness, not just for ourselves, but for our communities, our organizations, our workplaces. How do we work best? Like who's here and how do they work best? And just because like this company is doing that, that might work well for them, but it might
Yeah.
not work for us. And it requires a level of maturity, right? And of introspection that I think we didn't have so much before. It was just like, this is the model of
This is the way we've
productivity.
done. Yeah. But
Just
again,
work more. Just keep working.
yeah, and work harder.
Harder, harder. Yeah.
One of the mindfulness skills I teach leaders is, through my mindfulness practice, is the ability to have meta awareness. So you've got that ability to kind of rise above everything and see where everything's at. So you're disassociating the overthinking, the emotions, the stories, stories of the past, stories of the future, and just understand what's going on. And they
Yes.
connect better to their team members, their clients, all across the board when they have that.
Yeah. Yeah. So meta awareness, being able to see what's going on. And what do leaders need to do to get into that stage? Because is it difficult, and is it also a case by case sort of thing to figure out what what allows you to be clear enough and present enough yourself to then offer that to your teams?
Yeah, I think again, this even pre-COVID, it always goes back to self-care. So in leadership, great leaders, they always have a unique formula for themselves, but the pattern that follows, it's the inside out approach, right? We have to be able to lead ourselves first before others. It's very
Mhm.
a cliche thing, but there's a lot of science now behind that. And part of self leadership is understanding your wellness and what are the things that have to be happening in order for you to be a great leader. And a lot of that
Mhm.
is coming back down to mindfulness, right? Being able to understand just the power of the mind, power of the breath. I remember years ago reading about Richard Branson, owns, I don't know how many companies under the brand Virgin, but he's notoriously known for closing his door and just having 15, 20 minutes of meditation. Like just, during the day, boom, do not disturb. It works for him, right?
Yeah.
And so it's for each leader, it's finding that ability to be mindful, but then you have to also be able to incorporate a good sense of emotional intelligence,
Yes.
understanding that not everyone will be in that same space, and growth mindset, right? So growth mindset is all about mindfulness in a more applied way, like understanding the setbacks, being focused on the small steps that are taking you to get towards that larger goal, whatever it is. But there's different components that leaders draw on and able to lead these more modern organizations.
Yeah. And the growth mindset is really interesting. Um, and almost countercultural a little bit, because it used to be all about results, right? It's like you got to hit this result, and then how you get there is less important. But now we're paying attention to how we get there, whether we're
Yeah.
growing.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit more about that? Like what is
So
growth mindset and how do you
it's always been
live in
around, but
that
again,
way?
this was one of the benefits of COVID, right? We almost accelerated all these concepts and practices that were happening at a smaller scale into a much larger scale. So yeah, to your point, it was achieve this goal at any cost. It didn't matter how many bridges were burned, how many people got terminated or burnt out, we always want to know the how now. How did you go about doing this? Because it's taken a toll on organizations. Like obviously they've peeled the layers back and understand the revenue costs, but also in our societal organization, like what is the toll that has taken? And there's generations, right? There's generations of people in the workplace. They often say the boomers were the most competitive generation, created a
Mm.
lot of silos. I'm a tail end Gen Xer, so I kind of relate. I probably relate more to the millennials, but they bring more that work-life balance, that more holistic, humanistic approach to leadership, and that's
Yes.
that's almost, again, it's not new. I think the new part of it is actually putting it into practice. So again,
Yes.
skills, theories, we've talked about this before. You can be certified in a certain thing, but if you haven't practiced it, you haven't developed the skill. But we're at a stage now where, yeah, we have to put this into practice. What does it look like? And keep refining it. And
Yeah.
again, it's
Mm.
as a high performance athlete, I learned that at a very young age, right? It was all about the small steps, all about the missteps, learning from them, getting back on course.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah, and it sounds like a lot of work, right? So a lot of people might say, "Oh my God, on top of my to-do list, I have to learn to, be meta aware and
yeah,
have a growth mindset." But I think it also comes with a lot of benefits, right? Both for not just for the organization and for the team, but for the person, for the actual leader themselves and their joy and enjoyment of their life and their work. And I'm curious, what are some of the benefits you experience? Bringing your skills, your mindfulness skills to your work, and also maybe some of the have you seen some stories from your clients where they started to say, "Whoa, this is actually of benefit to me. It's not just that it's good for the organization or for my team."
yeah. I think for me, just coming into sometimes a very chaotic situation with a mindfulness presence. So there's that whole, you know, psychological theory around emotional contingency. Bring that into a situation. You don't have to say anything. It's literally just presence. And
Hmm.
we feel it even in a yoga studio. It's very contained, but it's being present. It's being able to have that meta awareness. And to your point, yeah, a lot of these skills are hard to learn at first, but when we start to practice them, it becomes second nature. So I'm at a point now where it fluidly happens, right? It just it can just be, it's a continuous stream. So investing the time up front, whether it's just practicing, what did they say like 10 minutes a day of mindfulness, right? That's kind of your entry point, and then let it grow from there. How does that roll out? And
Yeah.
not getting caught up in the swirl. Like literally, if you can short circuit that thinking, the quicker you do that, the better you're going to feel. The people around you will pick it up, and then the solutions, more the creative solutions, whether they're 5-month solution or a 5-minute solution, will start to
Hmm.
emerge.
Yeah, it's so true. And at first, I think you have to trust it, right? Like you got to try it out maybe for a little bit. And the
Hmm.
10 minutes of mindfulness that you mentioned, just to go back to the beginning, it doesn't have to be in stillness, right? Like you could say, when I'm walking to work or when I'm eating my breakfast, I'm going to just pay attention to my breath or to what I'm doing or to the experience of what I'm seeing and hearing and feeling.
Yeah,
And you do that, and at first it might feel clunky. It might feel like, well, am I doing this right? I don't know. It's like any skill, right? I like the analogy that people, if they start going to the gym to lift weights, they're not going to be strong when they start. Like I got a lot of people say, well, I can't meditate or I can't do mindfulness because my mind is too busy. It's too distracted. So yes, it's like saying I can't go to the gym because I'm not strong. Well, you gotta do the work. You gotta lift the weights. You gotta come back. The mind goes and you bring it back and it goes and it bring it back. And you got to
yeah,
do that over and over. But then over time, you'll have the experience that oh, something is shifting here. There's something. And what's hard, I think, for people, especially in our work world where everything's about like data and tangible things, is that it's not something you can see. You can measure it now because there is
So,
science around
yeah.
it, but the feeling is something that you just experience, right?
Hmm. It's, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And others around you will experience it too.
Hmm.
So, you say you're a leader that, was known for having a short fuse, and then all of a sudden starts practicing mindfulness. I
Yes.
guarantee you there'll be measurable results on an employee experience survey about that leader 6 months down. Oh, yeah, so and so is way more approachable.
Yeah.
What did they do? They didn't go off and do graduate work or anything like that. They simply started to practice some form of mindfulness that works for them.
Yeah.
Another thing I encourage leaders to do is remove the distractions. We are filled with distractions.
Yes.
Our digital devices, our phones, are constantly having to respond to emails, and there's a bit of an addiction to that, right? Whether it's
Yes.
a dopamine hit from, likes on social media, or just that adrenaline rush, saying, oh, I got through, 100 emails today. But be mindful. What did you accomplish? How do
Yeah.
you feel after that? There might have been a great adrenaline rush, right? So understand what's distracting you from your meaningful work, and building those meaningful relationships, again, with team members, with clients, with vendors, whoever it is, because we're all human, right? And we all connect
Hmm.
at a very fundamental level, and mindfulness will help you get there.
Yeah. And is there a little micro hit, like a little meditation or practice that you do when you are feeling distracted? And is that something you could tell us about and maybe even guide our listeners through?
Yeah, I think for me, it still comes back to body awareness, right?
Okay.
Like sitting in a meeting, and, am I getting caught up in the, the drama of the meeting, or am I focused on what the meeting's really about, right? And being able to just snap in and out of that awareness stage, right? Or if
Hmm.
there's tension brewing, where's my breath at, right?
Yes.
Because again, we're not saying, you know, every company or every leader that practices mindfulness will be a perfect leader, right? Because we're humans and we're imperfect. That's just the nature of our wiring. But understanding that awareness of where we're at and being able to take that mental step back. Very often after a busy day, I just kind of, just for a minute, understand, like, where's my mind at? If it's still
Hmm.
racing, I call it racing mind, it's still spinning, you know, what can I do to unplug? And
Yeah.
again, it's not through digital devices. I think a lot
Yeah.
of times we were drawn to our digital devices for comfort, for that hit of dopamine, if you're on any type of social media platform. But it's really just getting back to the simple things.
Yeah. And coming back to the body awareness. I
Hmm.
hear you saying it's like
Yeah.
because the devices will take us away, our thoughts will take us away, but we can come back. And I love this idea that you can do it in the middle of a meeting. Like we can do it right now just to check in. How's the body? How's the breath?
Yeah.
And that just and where's the mind? And that is really powerful for people because they might think, oh, I need to give up time to do this extra thing, but it's not, you're not giving up anything because it's a layer of awareness or even like of dropping back that you can do throughout your day.
Yeah.
You don't have
Oh,
to,
yeah.
you don't need any
The
extra time.
exactly, the dropping back is, yeah, that's a great descriptor. I mean, even when I walk from, the train to the office, it's about a 10-minute walk, but it's on a busy street. And in Toronto,
Mhm.
it's very busy. So you see a lot of people with their phones right to their nose, right? They're
Yeah.
completely unaware. And it's just, the practical side of my mind, it's just, it's safety. But you can just
Mhm.
walk being aware of traffic hazards. You're not thinking about it. You're just aware, right? You're not
Yes.
worried, You're just aware of the sounds, the visual things, like what are the cues, right? And just you're navigating your way along a busy sidewalk, crossing busy streets, and that's mindfulness, right? You're
Yeah.
sitting in a chair, your your mind starts to wander. How do you bring it back?
Beautiful. Is there anything else you want to share with our listeners?
Oh gosh.
Anything about what you're doing now, what you're excited about?
Yeah, I'm always looking for different ways to enhance the mindfulness experience. So again, it could be work related. Um, I started to do Ashtanga yoga, which is a different form than hot yoga,
Yes.
but I have no instructor now, right? So I have to be very mindful on the poses and understanding the flow from each pose to another pose. So it's another challenge to build that mindfulness muscle. And
Yeah.
then my professional lens is, so how do I take what I'm learning now in that, yoga studios are a great incubation lab to practice mindfulness. So how do I take that new knowledge off the mat and bring it into the day-to-day world that we're in?
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Paul. It's been so great to be with you and very inspiring to hear how you're bringing these practices to your day to day and helping our leaders and our organizations. And yeah, just looking forward to continuing to collaborate and grow our mindfulness together. So thank you for
Absolutely.
your
Thank you for
time
having
and
me.
energy.